Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Hearing
Dowhouse,
about this or pointless in fantasy in the sense.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
Well, all right. We are back in the building. One more week to go as we record this on a Wednesday night. We get to the NFL draft. And I think I had to lead the show with this. The Fantasy Football Advice Network is going live from the Crow's Restaurant in Nashville, Tennessee, for the first round of the draft next week, giving you full coverage on our YouTube channel at FFAdvice.net, and we'll be simulcasting to a Fox Sports radio broadcast there in Midwestern Tennessee. So look out. Fantasy Football Advice is here and coming. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mader, joined with Adam LaRue, Chris D, and of course, Chase Thornton, talking about some tight ends to wrap up our NFL draft series. We got some help for this one, so let's get our guest introduced. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. He's a guru on player profiler, the one, the only,
That is one hell of an introduction. I sometimes I wish I had a voice for radio like you do, Dan. You definitely have a gift there. But what's going on, fellas? Appreciate you guys having me on.
I appreciate you coming on. So this is another example of why the Fantasy Football Expo is so awesome, because this is where I got to meet Pete and we had a wonderful conversation, and that's how we get him on the show. You know, small timers like us. Pete, you're doing great things, by the way. You're really taking off this past year. It's been awesome to watch it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know I met Chris. I think we talked a decent amount too. Hoff was out there with me as well, who's one of our partners. But yeah, it's been a great year. I tried to do content in college for like a semester. Didn't take off the ground, and then I actually just started last year with Face Off, and then just started with Player Profiler this off season. Still doing stuff with Face Off, and my niche has been defensive streaming. I know it's a weird one, but that's something that my following seems to love, and yeah, so.
Well, that's Chris for us. He gives our defensive play of the week every single week during the redraft process. It's a hard one to pin down. So the fact that you're been able to kind of make that niche is a little bit impressive there, because nobody else is going to be able to nail that down from week to week.
It's fun. I think I have a nice kind of rule. I always try to go for home teams and look for low point totals. And if I can get a combination of both there, that's usually the first baseline that I use. And then I use some mixture of different EPA and different statistics. But yeah, it's fun, man. I don't know. I mean, we spend so much time, and we're going to do that today too, talking about offensive skill positions. It's nice to kind of focus on the other side of the football every once in a while. And I think sometimes for me, it actually helps me when evaluating my start sits on the skill position side of the football. So it's fun, man. I like it.
Well, absolutely. It's matchups. Now, let me ask you a question off of that, though. Focusing on the other side of the football, are you ever going to take this to IDP too, or are you going to stop it at defense special team streamer?
I have thought about the IDP route. I've been doing a little bit of fast draft stuff on Player Profile, where they actually have a best ball format for IDP, which is pretty cool. If you're into that, you can use my promo there. It's Nova, Nova. But yeah, they do IDP format there. I've done IDP. I just haven't done content on it. It's a lot. You're really talking about a whole other side of players. So we'll see. I mean, if there's a market for it and people are interested in my opinion on it, I'd love to give out some content on it. So
I was just curious, because you're only one step away already as the guru. We are only one step away from the NFL draft next week, which I cannot wait for. So today we're talking about the tight ends. We did quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers last week with Pat Fitzmaurice. All great episodes you should be checking out on Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app. Pete, let me start off with this. Everyone keeps telling me what a great tight end class this is. And I don't know if I see it that way. I think it's a deep tight end class than what we're used to, but I don't know if it's a great tight end class. What's your take on this?
I think it's a really good class. I think we've been really lucky as of late to have tight ends kind of come onto the scene and perform quickly. I mean, it's one of the slowest, if not the slowest, developing positions in the NFL. You got to pretty much be a tackle as well as a receiver. So you're pretty much learning two positions. But I'm really impressed with the class. I mean, I like Tyler Warren. I don't think I would say he is on the same level as Bowers prospect wise coming out. Now it's easy to say that after Bowers had such a phenomenal year. Hindsight's 2020, so it might be obvious to say, well, of course not. But I think it's got a lot of depth, and I think that's going to be the exciting thing is we may get a nice kind of addition to the pool from a position that's pretty weak right now in fantasy football.
It's always weak. And what kills me is that on the dynasty side of things, to your point, like if you don't get a tight end who's actually a first rookie draft grade ready to go, then you're pretty much putting this guy in your taxi squad and crossing your fingers and toes and hoping he hits in like 2 or 3 years. And that's what makes it real tough there. All right, so let's get this conversation started off. You mentioned him, Tyler Warren. He's the unanimous number one, not only the consensus, but amongst all of our rankings going into today's show. Why is Tyler Warren hands down number one in your mind?
I think. Oh.
He's a dog. He's a dog. That's what it is. He's a dog.
Oh, we're in the background. It's like, what do you mean?
Yeah, I think my wife just got home, so not the best timing there. But I think the cool thing that I like about Tyler Warren's background is that he actually played quarterback in high school, and I think when the tight end position, it's so important to understand zone, different spots on the field to sit down, and so. Having that background, I think you kind of see it show up on film. He's really good at finding soft zones to a defense. And his yards after catch ability is extremely strong. I mean, he had a college target share of 31.4, which is really strong. Now, Penn State didn't have a ton of like ball dominant, players, around him necessarily. But it's hard to knock that. I mean, he did also, he had a game where he had 17 catches, which tied the FBS single game record for a tight end and had 224 yards in that game, which was second most in Penn State history. But I just think he's really versatile. I think the problem when you look at like a guy like Kyle Pitts when he came into the NFL is a great athlete, but his issue is he just doesn't block. He doesn't provide that second part in the game where Tyler Warren kind of brings a nice blend to both, and he has really good yards after catch ability. So I like what I see out of Warren. I think there's a case for Loveland that some people will probably make too, but I think Warren for me is clear cut just because I think the athletic upside is what you're looking for, and I think he has that over Loveland, who is probably the closest guy out of the group to him.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Chris, when you see, let's come talk about, Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland. So I know you have him ranked 1, 2. Is there a gap in the tier to you?
Yeah, I think there is. And it's not a gap necessarily, as Pete kind of alluded to, like where I had some fourth, sight in the sense of what Brock Bowers was. I kept telling him he was a weapon. He wasn't just a tight end. He's a playmaker in offense. This isn't the same caliber guy. This isn't George Kittle. This isn't necessarily Travis Kelce. But it reminds me a lot of like a Tyler Eifert. Pete talked about, a good feel, a good understanding of the zone, his ability to block. He's not the greatest blocker in the world. I do have a little questions about how athletic he is. He didn't test in anything. We didn't see any kind of combine information. I think that's kind of purposeful. But having said all of that, the tape is nice. And what I think the difference for myself is that Tyler Warren has that ability to do both, where I think Loveland's more of a pass catcher. You hope that he can block. You hope that he can fill in. But he's kind of a skinny guy, built a little bit differently, especially not, in his leg part. It helps him getting in and out of his routes, but not necessarily the greatest thing for him getting up in blocks. He gets stood up a lot in the blocking game. So that's a guy that I think is more of a slot receiver versus Tyler Warren's a tight end and more of a mismatch. I think Loveland's going to have a little bit more issues possibly. He's going to need a offensive coordinator who kind of schemes up things for him. Well, I think Tyler Warren's is going to naturally have the game kind of come to him.
Yeah, and look, we had to have this debate all the time now, right? Because we had guys like Marvin Harrison and you name it, top prospects who are just not testing, not just at the combines, but they're not testing at the pro days, and this is leaving us with a little bit of a guessing game with the rest of us who are trying to put these data points together to actually make some nice predictions for everybody else out there. But he also, on his end, why run? Why test? Why do these things when it's so clear cut that you're the number one coming into the draft? I got to say, you got to be pretty athletic for a college offense to allow a tight end to run a wildcat. And it wasn't just because of his quarterback skill set. So I'm not overly concerned about it. Chase, let's go to you now. Tyler Warren, and talk a little bit about Colston Loveland too. 1-2, where's that gap to you?
Yeah, I think there's a definite gap between the two, but I agree with Chris. It's more so that, like with Loveland, I'm not necessarily sure that he is a complete tight end. I think he can be an offensive weapon in the right scheme. I think that if they want to use him right, I think he can be. But Tyler Warren he looks like a guy that can step in to any offense in this league and find a role and carve out a role as a starter at that position. He's an adequate blocker. He's not a superstar blocker by any means, but Tyler Warren can block with the best of them because he's so competitive. I think he plays physical. I like that. He's obviously an elite receiver at the position, in my opinion. When I watch him, this is a kid that set a school record at Penn State with 104 receptions. Penn State's one of those schools, football wise, where if you set a record in anything, it should make people sit up and take notice. And he just did that. Won the Mackey Award. But like you said, they even run him out of the backfield. They run him out of Wildcat. They put him all over the field. I like that positional versatility where you don't have to play him just as inline. You don't have to just play him as a move. You don't have to deploy him any one way. You can move Tyler Warren all over the field, and you're still going to get, Tyler Warren no matter what. He's not a Jimmy Graham seam stretcher type to me, but he can still run that route. But he's underneath and intermediate. I love watching Tyler Warren play some football. Colston Loveland, on the other hand, guy that I think can run that seam route a little bit, but he's not an elite route runner, but he separates well. I liked the way that Colston Loveland separated, in his routes. If he goes somewhere where they want to coach him up a little bit on his route running, I think he could be even better that way. Colston Loveland can run any route you want to stick in front of him, though. So as an offensive weapon, I really like him in this draft. I just think Tyler Warren, as the more complete player, has the better profile. We've talked about it before that we like. We talk about with running backs. If you can't block as a running back, you're not going to see the field as much as a guy who can. Same kind of thing with these tight ends here. Tyler Warren, being a complete player, won't have to come off the field in any situation. So there's always the possibility of him getting the football.
Yeah, Colston Loveland playing a lot more in the slot than he did in line. Adam, You had to know I was going to do this to you, buddy. Being the resident Colts fan, I mean, all the tight ends are going to you. Every mock, it's either Colston, Tyler Warren, whichever one falls. What do you think? The Colts get their hands, let's say it's Colston Loveland, because Tyler Warren's getting more and more into the top 10. Let's say it's Colston Loveland. How are you feeling about that?
I would love to have Tyler Warren. I think my problem with Loveland, one is the pick. I personally have him graded outside of my top 20. I have him graded as someone who, at the turn of the first round, I think I'm a little more comfortable. He, to me, is someone who, look, I think the reason that everyone wants to mock a tight end to the Colts is that they've been having this rotation at the position for such a long time. And I think the problem with mocking Colston Loveland is that you still need a blocking tight end with him. Like he's not going to be that inline guy. He's not going to be. He will to a degree, sure. But the whole point of drafting a tight end would be to stop the madness of having 3 tight ends that get 33% of the snaps each. And I feel like, to me, I don't think you get that, at least in the first couple of years of Colston Loveland. I like Colston Loveland. I think he's and I over the weekend I shared this with you. I think he's a better version of a pre-injury Dennis Pitta. For example, I think he is quick like that. I think he's got good hands. He doesn't have the long speed, and I don't think he blocks very well. So he's just someone who I don't think he's complete as a tight end. I think he's very good at what he does. I think he can be a very good big slot. But for a team that, I think we've talked about this ad nauseum for the last, as long as I've been on the show functionally, right? The Colts, especially with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, and knock on wood, at least in my opinion, that's the direction they should go. They need to be more physical in that regard, right? You need to be a physical team. That needs to be your identity. So to go with a receiving tight end would be a little bit frustrating to me.
Yeah, let them
DJ's
use the
coming,
receivers first.
DJ's coming, buddy. He's coming. Daniel Jones is coming. Hey, he'll target the middle of the field. He might be the key to unlocking the tight end on the Colts position. He might. I'm just kidding. I know. Adam gets so mad every time I bring that up. He's just like, it's all good. All right. So, I mean, for me, Chris, you talked about Tyler Eifert being your comp for Warren. And look, Tyler Eifert, had he not gotten a slew of injuries, we might have seen a much different career. But for me, when I look at Tyler Warren, I see a mirror image of TJ Hawkinson, of just a guy who's going to be able to beat a 3 down, but be a lethal volume weapon. Like, we're not talking about these guys who, like, he's going to be a field stretcher, super efficient. He's going to be a volume featured weapon. And I think in a draft that's missing true top 10 talent, because it is missing some talent at the top end, while he might get drafted higher than Brock Bowers, and I agree with you, Pete, that probably shouldn't happen. He's not the same type of prospect. Given this draft, it might. I'm okay with it because he projects out with his route running ability, with all of his metrics that he's had, that he should be a volume weapon. So I look at him as like a TJ Hawkinson. Colston Loveland, on the other hand, I am kind of more on you guys, like, as far as giving the extra caution. Like, I comped him to Hunter Henry. And I think Colston Loveland, his biggest problem right now is actually he needs to fill out his body, which is weird to say when a guy's 6'6", 248. But I think Chris said this, the lankiness of his build is what's strange. And he's always straight up. Like, even when I say that, I mean standing straight up. Like, even when he's in line and he's putting the blocks, he's always just, I'm popping right up to the sky. And that's an issue, again, keeping you on the field. I think of what happened to Dalton Kincaid, right? His first 2 years, where Dawson Knox is there. Dawson Knox limits his ability to get on the field in red zone situations. And now we're still kind of waiting to seeing maybe will Dalton Kincaid break. I worry about that to some degree with Colston Loveland. I think he's excellent in the red zone, which I feel like a team who takes him as high as he's projected to go would be hard to keep him out of that situation. But I do worry about that to some degree. Pete, you didn't get to talk too much about Colston Loveland. What do you think about all that?
I think your point is valid in that I think pad level is a little bit of an issue for him. I think, Michigan's offense and their play style too, I mean, it's not necessarily one where they're trying to air out the football, but it is a little concerning. I mean, a 10.4% college target share is not something that screams, hey, this guy is going to dominate or command the football. I mean, I like Colston Loveland. I definitely think that he's more of a finesse receiving kind of player, whereas Tyler Warren is a guy that's just going to play smash mouth in terms of play style, similar to Kittle in that regard. But it's funny you brought up Dalton Kincaid, and for some reason, sometimes he kind of reminds me of him in some ways like that too, where it's that lankiness. And I mean, this isn't a small guy. He's 6'6", 248. And honestly, his breakout age was 19 years old. So I think that's definitely something that's positive. Some people, it took me a little bit to really understand like what the big deal about the breakout age was, but for those that don't know that may be watching, right? When you look at a guy that's say 24 years old, like I love RJ Harvey in this class for running backs, right? He's 24 years old. Like he pops on film. He looks really good. But at 24 years old, if your breakout age in college is, at that age, 22, 23, 24, you're playing against younger guys. And so it's not that surprising. Loveland breaking out at 19 years old, he's got some room to still kind of grow. And so I definitely like Loveland. I think he's going to be, it's going to depend. I mean, if he goes to someplace like Denver and he's stuck behind Evan Ingram, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I could take a guy like that in the first round of rookie drafts. And a guy like Mason Taylor possibly gets better draft, similar-ish draft capital, high second round, and goes to a better situation. Like I could be swayed on taking a guy like Taylor over a guy like Loveland. So I think for Loveland, it's really going to depend on where he goes and is he going to be given a good opportunity.
Dependency on your location is what we talk about all the time in fantasy football. Well, we've been all nice and everything like that, and it's been cool, but now it's time to get into some showdowns. And anybody who's been watching this show, listening to this show, again, favorite podcast app, YouTube channel, FF Advice Net, you've been waiting for this showdown between me and Chris when it comes to Arroyo and Harold Fannin, because we've been passing each other by, mentioning it while we're on other topics, and it's been gearing up. Pete is going to judge this for us as the guest. We're going to put him on the spot. Chris, he's representing Arroyo. I'm representing Harold Fannin. Chris, go ahead and take it away.
First, shout out to the U. But Arroyo, look, this guy who's 6'5", 250, got a good wingspan. With the knocks you're going to have from is basically the health concerns, and then you had a 1-year breakout. A lot of these tight ends had 1-year breakout. We all loved Tyler Warren. We kind of overlooked the fact that he blew up this last year. Previous to that was good, but not nearly what we've seen this past year, where basically a good quarterback and no weapons to throw the ball to. But Arroyo, on a different hand, had a guy that was 16.9 yards per reception, 9.9 yards after catch. So you got a guy who stretches the field, has the good wingspan, has the good size. I actually think, and this is kind of what Pete was talking about earlier, I could be convinced to take him over Loveland. Has it not been for the injury history, I like the tape a little bit better. One of the things for Loveland kind of stood out to me was almost all his routes are in breaking. Now, I think you guys are, we all know that on this show, I'm not the Dalton Kincaid guy. I do not believe Dalton Kincaid had never. I think Loveland's more athletic and has better, gets out in and out of his breaks better than that. But Arroyo is actually one of those guys who I think is what we're looking for in that tight end, that pass catcher, the guy who glides in the field when the ball's in his hands, can use his feet well to get off in this as a big slot receiver, and has a willing blocker. He's not necessarily going to wow you in blocking, but he wants to get low. He tries to get involved, and it's something he's kind of still filling into. The guy was basically a glorified receiver when he got recruited. So for overall, I think for myself, I look at him as like a Mark Andrews, and then we look at Hal Fannin. Like I said, Mark Andrews, similar size, similar weight, similar skill set coming out. Hal Fannin, Dan, I have to give you credit. He definitely moved up my board. The thing for Hal Fannin, production, everybody's going to talk about the target shares, all the fun numbers and analytics. I understand that. I will give him a shout out, but he's 6'3", 241. What you could definitely see positive for him is that short passing attack and his threat in the short passing gun. You saw the 3-cone, you saw that in 10-yard split, but you have a smaller catch radius than you have with Arroyo. You have a lower vert. You don't have necessarily the same wingspan. And you have a guy who, in a lot of ways, reminds me of Charles Clay. Similar size, similar weight, coming out of college, has a similar skill set. The ceiling is what I struggle with for Fannin. While he's amazing with the ability to kind of make the people miss with that within 5 yards, and then you kind of saw, like, as I said, with the cone, it's a weird way how he makes his people miss. I use a basketball comparison, look at him with Kyle Anderson, like slow-mo, where everything he does doesn't make sense, but somehow he gets to the hole, somehow the move gets there, it works out for him. He does the same thing with his moves. He broke a lot of tackles. It wasn't necessarily from boot strength. He's a good stiff arm, but it wasn't necessarily from juking people or even speed. The 4.71 wasn't necessarily impressive for his size. So what you saw was basically an offense that featured him and used different ways and used a lot of old concepts that I don't know a lot of teams use in the NFL to get him the ball and involved. Well, I think Arroyo is a guy who can easily grow into being a 3-down tight end, has a skill set you can immediately use as a second tight end in the red zone, as a field stretcher, and as a big play guy. And I think he's just scratching the ceiling of what it can potentially be. Like I said, this was a big-time recruit going into Miami. History of Miami tight end had been good until more recently. But a guy who I think can carry that tradition. And I think the big thing to me is that you look for a guy who could dominate down the road. This is a guy that I saw as a freshman play out until he got injured his sophomore or his junior year. He looked the part right off the bat. He stood out right off the bat. So this is a guy to me that I am very excited about. Hal Fannin is definitely a guy that could be good, Dan, but I think it's going to take a lot of things to have to work out for him to have any chance to show anything in the NFL.
You want to know how it works? It's called football IQ and a tactician as a route runner. That's what Harold Fannin is. Look, this is somebody who just jumped on the board. In his junior year, his junior year was just as good of a season as Arroyo's quote unquote breakout year this past season. Now, yes, on Bowling Green, and I hear all about the low competition all the time from being in Bowling Green. But I want to point out something to everybody. This dude did it against the big boys too. Penn State, Texas A&M had two of his best games of the season. 11 catches, 137 yards, a touchdown against Penn State. 8 catches, 145 yards, and a touchdown against Texas A&M. These weren't just power conference schools. These are two of the top defenses in the nation this past year. Oh, and he graded out really well as a blocker in those games, and overall is one of the top 10 tight ends. I'm not saying we're going to line him up in line and have him take on 270-pound defensive ends every play. But what I am saying to you is that this is a guy, when you're playing those outside zones where those tight ends aren't necessarily lined up right on the line of scrimmage anyway, they're split out a little bit to begin with. He's a really good blocker who's going to do really well against linebackers, safeties, and DBs. And I think he can hold his own enough against a defensive line to actually be a 3-down tight end, something I don't think Arroyo can really do. I'll talk about that in a second. I'm also tired of hearing about the 4.71. The 4.71, yes. Did I want Harold Fannin to run a 4.5, 4.6? Sure. But the 4.71 is not a death knell when it comes to the tight end position. TJ Hawkinson, Zach Ertz, Cole Kmet, Zach Ertz, Jordan Reed. That's the one I was waiting to tee you up on. Jordan Reed ran a 4.73. Wasn't really a problem for him. Why? Because he got open consistently. I think Fannin has a great pathway to a high ceiling because he has the skill set you need, again, to go back to my Tyler Warren comp of being a high volume threat. Now it's going to come down to draft capital. Arroyo, Harold Fannin, roughly the same projected draft capital as of right now, somewhere in that late end day 2. As long as that stays the same, I like Fannin a hell of a lot more. And Fannin's not even 21 yet. There's still a way to go. He still has more strength that he can put on. Do I have to say the numbers? Number one in missed tackles, over 1,500 yards, over 100 catches. The dude was ridiculous in every capacity possible. Now, you talk about Arroyo, and I don't want to get this twisted. Arroyo's my number 4 tight end. This is not a I hate Arroyo thing. This is I got to put Chris back in his place thing more so than anything else. But he's a vertical stretch who doesn't do much else. Not a good blocker. I don't think he's a terrific route runner either for a guy who looks like a wide receiver, who runs like a wide receiver. Rounded breaks, doesn't sink his hips very well. Talk about guys who stand straight up all the time. That is Arroyo. Part of the reason why he had injury problems his first 2 seasons. And I'm just not all that enthralled with a guy whose big breakout season was 5th in receptions on a team that was led by Xavier Restrepo. Nice receiver. Not something I think this guy should be struggling to get targets and catches behind either. And he played a full 13 games. So I have questions about Arroyo where I think his floor, the ceiling, is a lot wider, a lot more variance than I think Harold Fannin is, who's going to wind up on a team that's going to utilize him as such. Pete, you go ahead. Let us know what you think about these players and who you think wins this debate.
Yeah, I think you make a good point in terms of the variance. I think Arroyo has much more boom or bust. I think Chris makes a good point. You know, this was a really highly touted guy coming out of into college football, but the injuries definitely slowed him down. I have my hesitancy on Arroyo, who, look, he had a really nice day at the Senior Bowl, nice week at the Senior Bowl, and I think people were kind of in awe of his athletic ability, but to me, the injuries are definitely a concern. I think Dan makes a good point too. For his size at 250 pounds, 6'5", like, he isn't that good of a blocker, but I'll give to him that I do think he's a willing blocker. His technique just isn't there. So maybe that's something he can learn about. I would say on the Harold Fannin side, I definitely agree that I think Fannin has a chance to stick in the NFL much longer. Now, he's 2 inches shorter and 10 pounds lighter, but he also, when you talk about pound for pound, he fits into his frame better than Arroyo. So where he's maybe a little bit smaller, he still fits well in his frame. And yeah, I'm not really super concerned about the 40 time, but I would give it to Dan here. I think the point of, putting up big games against 2 big teams in Penn State. And I think it was Penn State. And what was the other team, Dan?
Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. Yeah, I mean, the fact that, you can kind of show up in those games that, look, showing up.
Players Texas A&M get drafted, by the way. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Your defensive line.
Fair. I think Dan's point of look, when you think of Miami, they had one of the better offenses in college football last year.
16.9 yards per catch as a tight end. Who else has done that?
I know.
When's the
I
last
think
time
the
that's happened?
ceiling-
35.
I think
You wanna
I
be
think
nuts?
ceiling is higher for Arroyo. I think floor is much higher for Fannin. I think it depends on what you're looking for. But
Can
I
I
think
ask you guys this real quick? And then I'm not, definitely
yeah,
Dan
go
got
ahead.
it. But you guys keep saying the volume thing. What offense is going to feature a guy who runs 4.71 at 6'3", 240 pounds, and most of his routes were within 5 yards to 7 yards of line of scrimmage?
Who
I
featured
don't.
Jordan Reed?
I see teams using the receivers, the slot receivers for that. I see teams use the other guys who are trying to get them involved. I see them using the running backs. I don't see a team who's going to feature this guy the way that Bowling Green did, where, like I said, they were running like wing T offense, basically to involve him to get him the ball. So that's where I have a lot of questions. How much commitment is there going to be to get this guy involved? And this has been my thing with Dalton Kincaid. I give him that Fannin's a way better tackle breaker than I thought Dalton Kincaid is, and way younger, by the way, as well. But I also have a question of what are you going to really get 6 or 7 yards consistently? Who's going to feature that as part of their key part of their offense?
I mean, Kincaid didn't have the numbers, but he had the volume this past year. Like they tried to get him the ball, he just didn't necessarily produce the way you would have wanted to at that rate. But he was a featured part of that passing game. And again, I'll just go back to Jordan Reed. I mean, Jordan Reed fits all those measurables you just pointed out, and Fannin has just as good of a burst score. I mean, he's got his 10-yard split was second. Had the 3-cone drill was third in this class.
Like I said, within 10 yards, everything in 10 yards, I give him. I gave you that.
But how often are tight ends in today's league really running much more down the field? I mean, like the days of the vertical tight end, there aren't many of them left really anymore. They're not asked to do that nearly as much. They're asked to operate 5 to 15 yards down the field, not much more than that. Nothing. I got it.
Oh, I have a lot of rebuttal. I say, look at Kyle Juszczyk's usage the last 4 or 5 years. A guy who can break tackles, can do all those things underneath 6, 7 yards consistently.
Who'd you?
You're fullback, Kyle
You're
Juszczyk.
fullback.
That's what I thought he said. What?
Yeah, well, look how they use him, because we're talking about a guy who's 6'3", 241 pounds, who was 230 pounds most of the season last year, bulked up to 240, and you guys already see he fills in his body, whereas Arroyo, who's 6'5", 250, can add some weight to his body. And like I said, Mark Andrews, my comp for him, where Mark Andrews, a lot of questions about his blocking skills. He wasn't the first mouth got fed in Oklahoma either, but was a guy that I looked for and got down the field. And that was why I liked him over Hayden Hurst back then.
Well, this is why you guys were all waiting for this debate